The crystal caught the light the way it always did in rooms built for power, sharp, deliberate, cold. The dinner table stretched long and low-lit, lined with the kind of men who didn't raise their voices because they didn't need to, and the women who had learned to match that frequency. Conversations ran underneath each other like quiet currents. Silverware touched porcelain with the soft precision of people who had grown up knowing how. Ngozi Ease sat near the center of it all. Calm. Composed. She was mid-sentence, speaking to the man on her left about currency hedging and emerging markets, her voice unhurried and certain, the kind of voice that made people lean in without realizing they were doing it. Then Sylvia Yoon stepped behind her. She smiled first. The smile came naturally, it had been practiced in enough rooms exactly like this one. Then, quietly, but clearly enough for the nearest guests to hear. You shouldn't be sitting here. Staff eat after service. A beat. Or were you not told where to wait? A few conversations thinned. Someone's fork paused midair. Ngozi didn't move. Do you need help finding where staff stand? Sylvia leaned closer. And this time her hand closed around the back of Ngozi's chair, not a brush, not an accident, and pulled it. Slightly. Deliberately. The move of someone who had decided a correction needed to be made and was making it. You can step away now, Sylvia added, her voice tightening just enough to lose its polish. And when Ngozi didn't move, Sylvia reached forward, her hand closing toward Ngozi's arm, not to guide, but to remove. That was the line. Ngozi stood. Smooth. Unhurried. Like she had been planning to stand all along. And as Sylvia's hand came forward, reaching, asserting, crossing into something physical, Ngozi caught her wrist. Not violent. Not a performance. Just complete control. Her fingers closed and held, and the room went absolutely silent. Sylvia's smile didn't fall immediately. It took a moment, a slow, terrible moment, for the reality of what was happening to reach her face. This is inappropriate, Sylvia said quietly, steadying herself. You're causing a scene. Ngozi looked at her. Not with anger. With something colder and more precise. If you touch me again, this won't end at the table. She released her. Then she turned to the room. Unhurried. Let her eyes move across every face already watching, the associates, the guests, the men who had spoken around her all evening, and she addressed all of them at once. I want everyone here to remember this moment. Because what just happened tells you exactly who she is and nothing about who I am. A fork dropped at the far end of the table. Someone whispered. A woman in a dark dress looked away. At the head of the table, Kwon Seok-hyun had not moved. His hands were flat beside his plate. His expression had not changed. But his eyes were locked on Ngozi. And they did not move. The room held its breath and waited. If you think that moment was intense, you haven't seen what happens when he finally speaks. Like the video, subscribe, and stay with me. Because you don't want to miss what happens next. 3 months before that dinner, Ngozi was alone on the 14th floor at 11:47 at night, rebuilding a presentation that Richard Hale had gutted and resubmitted under his name that afternoon. The original file sat on her desktop, time-stamped, intact, 63 slides she had built from source data Richard had not touched once. She had the access logs. She had pulled them the moment she saw his name on the submission email. She was not crying. She was making it better. Her colleague Dana had appeared in her doorway around 10, coat on, keys in hand. Go home, Ngozi. It's not worth it. Ngozi looked up. I'm not doing this for him, she said. I'm doing it because it's mine. Dana left. Ngozi kept building. By midnight, the presentation was better than it had ever been. She saved it, sent it to herself, and went home. She did not ask anyone's permission. She never had. People read her stillness as passivity and her precision as coldness and her refusal to perform urgency as a lack of drive. None of that was correct. Ngozi Ease was one of the most deliberate people in any room she entered. She had simply stopped letting other people's timelines rush her. She had grown up watching her mother work double shifts at a hospital where women with lighter resumes and easier last names moved past her year after year. Her mother never said much about it directly. But Ngozi had watched, had catalogued, had made a decision at 19 that she would spend her life becoming undeniable, Not loud, not aggressive, just completely and permanently undeniable, and she would make every room that tried to overlook her say her name out loud. That was the engine. It had never stalled. Kwon Seok-hyun was running on something different. Something quieter and more corrosive. On the surface, he was everything the room required. Controlled, precise, unreachable. Kwon Capital managed portfolios for some of Seoul's oldest money. What those portfolios also managed invisibly, carefully, was the financial backbone of a criminal network his father had constructed over 30 years. Seok-hyun had inherited it at 26 when his father died in a hotel room in Busan, and had spent the 8 years since then quietly taking it apart from the inside. Not all of it. He was not naive about what he was. But there were rooms he refused to enter and deals he refused to touch, and the men who had served his father watched him with a particular impatience, waiting for him to expand, to harden, to become the version of this they understood. He gave them just enough and kept pulling back the rest. In boardrooms full of men twice his age, he let them speak until they were finished. Then he asked one question. Always one. Always precise. The silence that followed did the work he needed it to do. After they filed out, he sat alone in the emptied room for a moment, not triumphant, just tired in the specific way of a man who has been performing certainty since he was 26 years old and hasn't stopped since. He was beginning, slowly, to want something that was actually his. The financial summit wasn't supposed to matter. He was there for a session on Southeast Asian infrastructure. He arrived early, ended up in the wrong room, and stayed because the woman presenting at the front had a precision that made everyone else in the space look like they were operating at reduced speed. He sat in the back. He did not take notes. He just watched. Afterward, in the corridor, he found her mid-confrontation. Richard Hale was holding court with 3 colleagues, attributing the morning's presentation to a group effort, his voice carrying the full confidence of a man who had gotten away with things before. Ngozi walked up from behind and stepped into the circle without breaking stride. No, that model was mine. The data sourcing, the framework, the projections, start to finish. I'd appreciate you not describing it otherwise. The circle dissolved. Richard opened his mouth and thought better of it. Ngozi turned to go. Seok-hyun stepped forward. You embarrassed a man who could have ended your career. She stopped. Looked at him. Gave him exactly 1 second. Then he shouldn't have built his reputation on my work. He reached into his jacket and held out a card. Most people ask permission before doing something like that. She took the card. Looked at it once. Then looked at him. That's why most people stay exactly where they are. She walked away. He stood there after she was gone. Then he put his hands in his pockets and went to find his session, which he was now late for, and which he spent entirely thinking about something else. She didn't call for 11 days. When she did, he picked up on the second ring. Their first meeting was coffee that became 3 hours neither of them planned for. She asked him what he actually did, not the website version, the real version. He told her more than he had told anyone in a long time and noticed it happening while it was happening and couldn't fully explain why he didn't stop. Ngozi listened without the 2 reactions he was used to, either fear dressed up as composure or fascination dressed up as appetite. She just listened. Then said, so you inherited a machine you didn't build, and now you're figuring out what to keep. He looked at her across the table. Yes, he said. That was all. But something shifted. They met 5 more times across 6 weeks. He brought her into rooms she didn't normally access, not to impress her. She understood that early, but because he wanted to see how she carried herself in spaces designed to measure people. She carried herself exactly the same everywhere. That was what he was looking for. She questioned a decision he made in front of 3 of his associates, directly, without softening it. He said nothing. 2 days later, he reversed the decision quietly. She found out through someone else. Said nothing to him about it. But she knew. And he knew she knew. That was its own conversation. One night, late, city lights moving past the car window on the way back from a dinner, she turned and said, have you ever wanted something simple? He was quiet. Then, I didn't. Until I met someone who doesn't make things complicated just to feel important. She looked back at the window. Something settled between them in the silence that followed, not named, not announced. Just there. 3 weeks later, he called her personally. Formal dinner. An important evening. Come. Business or personal? She asked. Both. She paused. Then, I'll decide. She showed up. What she did not know was that this dinner had been arranged 4 months earlier. Sylvia Yoon's family had flown in. Flowers in the Yoon family's preferred arrangement had been ordered by Mrs. Kwon herself. The seating chart had been constructed so that Sylvia would sit visible and central, present in every conversation, impossible to overlook. Tonight was meant to be the night Sylvia was formally woven into his world. The beginning of something everyone in his circle had agreed on long before he was consulted. Seo-kyun had invited Ngozi anyway. Sylvia knew something was wrong the moment Ngozi walked through the door. Not anything she could name cleanly. The dress was fine. The entrance was unremarkable. It was the shift in Seo-kyun, barely visible, imperceptible to anyone who hadn't spent 2 years reading him. Sylvia had spent 2 years reading him. She saw it. She watched Ngozi move through the pre-dinner hour. Watched her speak to senior associates with the ease of someone who had never needed a room's approval. Watched the men listen, actually listen, not the careful performance of attention they gave women they were managing. And she felt something cold settle in her chest that she called, privately, strategy. She misintroduced Ngozi twice. Once as a guest from outside the circle, once as someone Seo-kyun had mentioned in passing. Small framings. Designed to make Ngozi peripheral, temporary, unclear. Ngozi received both without expression and corrected neither. Sylvia read this as a small victory. It was Ngozi deciding she wasn't going to spend her evening being managed by someone who was afraid. At the table, the provocations continued. A question about Ngozi's work was phrased as polite interest, but built to make her sound like someone still climbing rather than someone who had already arrived. A comment about her firm that was technically accurate and subtly diminishing. Ngozi answered each one and moved on. Which should have been the signal to stop. It wasn't. The hand on the chair was the decision. Where calculation became reckless. Where small became irreversible. And we were back to the room. Back to the silence. Back to Ngozi standing and the wrist caught and the words landing clean across every face at that table. After Ngozi released her, Sylvia recovered fast, because that was the thing about her. She recovered fast. She repositioned. Smiled at the nearest guests. Said with practiced lightness, she's bold. Seo-kyun, where did you find her? Reframing. Ngozi as a curiosity. An interesting import. Someone brought in for color, not weight. A reminder to the room that Sylvia was the one who belonged here permanently and could afford to be charmed by the novelty. Seo-kyun said nothing. The silence held. Sylvia felt it and pushed through it, turning back to Ngozi, voice dropping to something meant to feel private. I'm sure you worked very hard to get here. Some of us were born into it. Ngozi smiled. Not the patience she had been wearing. An actual smile. Brief and precise. And some of us were invited. A sound escaped from somewhere down the table. Controlled but unmistakable. Sylvia's composure bent. Do you know who you're speaking to? Yes, Ngozi said. Someone confusing proximity with importance. The table was completely still now. Every pretense of side conversation had collapsed. A voice from the far end, Park, one of the senior associates, a man who had served Seo-kyun's father, said almost without meaning to, wait. Who invited her? Silence. Every face turned to the head of the table. Seo-kyun stood. Slow. Deliberate. Nothing wasted. You just disrespected the only person in this room who owns what tonight is built on. The room broke open. Shock moved through it like a current, quiet, immediate, total. Guests looked at each other. Looked at Ngozi. Looked at Sylvia. Started connecting what they hadn't been told and what they were only now understanding. A quiet voice near the middle of the table. Wait. That was her. Another, lower. The deal, that was hers? Sylvia stood completely still, searching his face for the arrangement, for the history, for the promise she had been told existed between their families. She found nothing she recognized. He turned to her. Step outside. No anger in it. No explanation. Just authority, flat and final, the kind that doesn't require volume because volume was never the point. Sylvia looked at him for one more moment. Then she walked out. The dinner continued. But the room was different now. The air in it was different. And everyone at that table understood, without being told, that something had just ended and something else had begun. It was Ngozi who found the hallway first, stepping away from the table briefly, and it was there that Sylvia found her. The performance was gone now. No smile. No positioning. Just Sylvia standing in front of her with the cold directness of a woman who had run out of patience for subtlety. You think he chose you? It wasn't a question. You've been here 3 months. Our families have been aligned for 15 years. Do you understand what that means? What he would have to undo to make whatever this is into something real. Ngozi didn't speak. Sylvia moved closer. You are a phase. A disruption. You're not the future. You're the interruption. He brought you here tonight because you're new and you challenge him, and men like him enjoy that for exactly as long as it stays convenient. And then they go back to what was always waiting. She paused. I was always waiting. I am inevitable. The hallway was quiet. Ngozi held her gaze through all of it without moving. Then she said, then why does he look at me like he's already chosen? She stepped forward, not aggressively, just closing the distance to something honest. The problem isn't me, Sylvia. It's that he never chose you. He never once chose you. And tonight, in front of every person you came here to impress, everyone saw it. Silence. Ngozi walked back into the dining room. That night, before the cars had fully cleared the drive, Mrs. Kwan called. Seok-hyun took the call in the study. His mother's voice was controlled, the particular control of a woman who had held a family together through grief and pressure and 20 years of a world that required her to be harder than she wanted to be. She did not scream. She did not need to. You humiliated a family we have invested in for 15 years. In front of people who matter. In front of people who remember. She is stable, his mother said. She is known. Her family understands ours. What you brought in tonight, that woman, is an unknown variable in a life that cannot carry unknown variables. Do you understand what I'm telling you? He let her finish. Then, I'll handle it. Handle it correctly, Seok-hyun. The call ended. He sat in the quiet of the study for a long time after. Then he drove. Ngozi found out before he arrived. One of the guests had told someone who had told someone, and by the time Seok-hyun's car pulled up to her building, she already knew what the evening was supposed to have been. Sylvia's introduction. The flowers. The seating chart his mother designed. The beginning that everyone had agreed on without him, or with a version of him that had simply stopped existing at some point without anyone noticing. She didn't raise her voice when he came in. She didn't need to. She looked at him from across the room and said, You didn't choose me. You used me to avoid choosing at all. You needed a disruption and you brought one. He didn't move to defend himself. You're right, he said. I don't stand in for decisions you're afraid to make, she said. I'm not a statement. I'm a person. He held that. Let it land fully. You're right, he said again. I handled it badly. You deserve to know what you were walking into. I made a choice that cost you without asking if you were willing to pay it. I'm sorry. It was the most he had said about himself in one breath in years. It cost him something visible. She could see it in the way he held still after, like the words had taken something with them. She looked at him for a long time. Then Ngozi said, I need time. He nodded. Left without asking for more. He did not call. He did not show up. 3 days later, a letter arrived at her office. Handwritten. 1 page. The envelope had no return address, but she knew the handwriting before she opened it, precise, slightly compressed, the penmanship of someone who was more careful than they appeared. She read it once. Then she read it again. He had written about what she had made him see, not about her, but about himself. About the life he had been running that was half his father's and half an arrangement and only partially his. About what it meant to him to be around someone who had never once adjusted herself to make him comfortable, and how that had slowly become the thing he needed most. He did not ask her to forgive him. He did not ask her to come back. He wrote 1 line near the bottom of the page that she read 4 times before she set the letter down. You're the first choice I've made that costs me something. I'm choosing it anyway. She sat with it for a long time. Then she picked up her phone. He sat with his mother the following evening. Not with the tension that had lived in every conversation since the dinner, something different. Something that had moved past tension into clarity. He told her the arrangement with the Yoon family was finished and that he would make that call himself. That he respected everything she had carried and everything she had built to protect him. That he understood why she had chosen what she chose and why she believed it was right. And that he was not going to live a life that had been assembled by other people before he understood what living was. His mother was quiet for a very long time. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere in the house something settled. Then Mrs. Kwon said, "Bring her to dinner." Properly. Not warmth. Not approval. But a door, opened just enough for the light to come through. The dinner was smaller. The table was tight, just 3 of them, the space stripped of everything ceremonial and left with only what was real. Mrs. Kwon studied Ngozi the way she studied everything, completely, without performing the observation, filing what she found away for later use. She asked her questions. About her work, about her family, about the choices that had brought her to a room like this one. Ngozi answered everything directly and offered nothing extra. She didn't try to be liked. She didn't perform warmth. She was simply and completely herself, the same way she was everywhere, and Mrs. Kwon, who had spent decades watching people become different versions of themselves the moment they sat at her table, noticed. Near the end of the meal, Mrs. Kwon set down her glass and looked at Ngozi with the full weight of her attention. "Women like you don't usually last in rooms like mine," Mrs. Kwon said. "If staying with my son costs you everything you've built, do you still stay?" Ngozi met her eyes without hesitation. "I didn't build my life to keep it small." The room was quiet. Then something moved across Mrs. Kwon's face, not a smile, not quite, but the architecture of one. The beginning of something that hadn't existed before this dinner. Respect. Offered without announcement, without ceremony, the way the things that matter most usually arrive. Outside afterward, the night was cool and still. Ngozi stood beside Seokyeon on the steps, the city somewhere behind the trees, the quiet between them, the comfortable kind, the kind that doesn't need filling. She put her hand in his. He looked down at it. Then he looked at her. And she could see it in his face, the thing that was usually so carefully held back, that this meant something. That she meant something. Not a disruption. Not a phase. A decision. The first real one he had made that was entirely his own. "This is still complicated," she said. "I know," he said. She looked at him. "Okay." And that was enough. Not a fairy tale ending, something better than that. Something that had been tested by a room full of people who had tried to decide what she was worth, by a woman who had tried to make her small, by a family that had tried to write a different story, and had come through all of it intact. Together. Chosen. The city hummed somewhere in the distance. They stayed on the steps a little longer, and neither of them felt the need to move. A staff member passed behind them, one of the same people who had been moving quietly through the dinner earlier. This time, as he passed Ngozi, he nodded. Not out of obligation. Out of recognition. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss what's coming next. Tell me in the comments, at what moment did you realize she wasn't the one to underestimate? I read every single one of them. Thanks for watching.